They never asked about the laptop. Not once. Not when I showed up to family dinners with the same battered messenger bag I'd carried for 6 years. Not when I ordered water instead of wine. Not when I stopped talking about my plans altogether. They just looked at me like I'd given up, like I'd settled into a life that disappointed them. I'm Jordan Mitchell, and in my family, success wasn't just expected, it was the only language they spoke. Especially when you were standing next to someone who spoke it fluently. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My brother Tyler, the marketing executive, the one with the corner office and the platinum credit card, the one who could make our mother beam just by mentioning his latest campaign. And me, I was the one who did freelance work from a loft apartment in Reno. What they never knew, what they never thought to ask, was that I'd built something they couldn't even imagine. A company worth $45 million. A team of over 100 people. Software running in offices across 3 continents. And not once, not in 6 years, did anyone in my family ask me what I actually did all day. Instead, they offered gentle suggestions about going back to school. They forwarded job listings with subject lines like, "Thought of you." They spoke in that careful, sympathetic tone people use when they think you're too fragile to hear the truth, that they believed I'd failed. So I stopped correcting them. I stopped hoping they'd see me. I stayed in Denver, in my small loft above a bike repair shop on Larimer Street, and I let them believe whatever story made them comfortable. And I told myself it didn't matter. Until one night at a wedding I dreaded attending, my brother's boss walked to the microphone. He adjusted his tie, looked directly at me across that glittering ballroom, and said the words that shattered everything they thought they knew. "Jordan Mitchell built the software my entire company runs on. Without it, we'd be dead in the water." And until tonight, I had no idea the owner was sitting right here. The champagne glasses stopped mid-air. The string quartet's music seemed to fade into nothing. And every head in that room, including my brother's, turned toward the back table where I'd been placed, table 18, the one near the kitchen doors where they seat people they're obligated to invite but don't quite know what to do with. That was the moment everything changed. Not because of the recognition, but because I finally realized I'd spent 6 years protecting people who never once protected me. You've heard their version of who I am. Now let me show you mine. Let me tell you what it costs to build something from nothing while everyone you loved believed you'd become nothing at all. The message came through 3 weeks before the wedding. Tyler's text was characteristically brief, cheerful in that performative way that always felt rehearsed. Big news. Getting married May 20th at the Pinnacle Club. Need my best man / sister / sibling, you know what I mean? Vanessa's already obsessed with the seating chart. Say you'll come. Mom and Dad are asking about you. I stared at the message for a long time. The last part was what got me. Mom and Dad are asking about you. Not because they'd actually called. Not because they'd texted separately or sent an email or dropped by my apartment that was only 30 minutes from their house in Highlands Ranch. But because Tyler, in his infinite diplomatic grace, needed me to feel included enough to show up and fill a seat. I typed back, "Congratulations. I'll be there." And then I muted the conversation. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of my closet trying to decide what version of myself to present. The clothes hanging there told 2 different stories. On one side, hoodies and jeans, the uniform of someone who worked from home and answered to no one. On the other side, tailored blazers and silk blouses, the remnants of a version of myself I'd packed away when I left Austin and came back to Denver 6 months ago. I chose something in between. A simple black dress, elegant but not flashy, expensive but not obviously so. The kind of thing that would let me blend into the background, which was exactly where I intended to stay. The Pinnacle Club sat on the 23rd floor of a glass tower downtown. All floor-to-ceiling windows and sweeping views of the Rocky Mountains. It was exactly the kind of venue Tyler would choose, impressive and expensive and designed to make a statement. I arrived exactly on time, not early enough to help, not late enough to be noticed. The lobby was already filling with guests, women in jewel-toned gowns and men in suits that cost more than my monthly rent, or at least more than what my family assumed my rent was. I checked in at the welcome table, where a young woman with an iPad and a professional smile scanned down the list. "Jordan Mitchell," she said, "you're at table 18. She handed me a card with a tiny calligraphed number and gestured vaguely toward the back of the ballroom. I thanked her and made my way through the crowd, weaving between clusters of Tyler's college friends and Vanessa's sorority sisters and various relatives I hadn't seen since the last obligatory holiday gathering. Table 18 was exactly where I expected it to be. Far back, tucked near the kitchen entrance, close enough to hear the staff coordinating plate service but far enough from the head table that I'd need binoculars to see the actual ceremony. I recognized one person already seated, Derek, my cousin who worked in insurance, and had once told me at Thanksgiving that freelancing was just a nice word for unemployment. He looked up when I approached, his face registering surprise and then something like forced enthusiasm. "Jordan, hey, didn't know you'd be here." He gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Looks like we're at the kids' table." He laughed at his own joke. I sat down without responding and placed my small clutch on the table. The centerpiece was an elaborate arrangement of white roses and eucalyptus, tall enough that it blocked my view of the person sitting directly across from me. I didn't mind. The ceremony was brief and beautiful in the way expensive weddings always are. Tyler stood at the altar in a custom tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled, his smile wide and confident. Vanessa floated down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. My parents sat in the front row, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, my father's hand on her shoulder. I watched from my distant seat and felt nothing. Not sadness, not resentment, just a strange, hollow distance, like I was observing someone else's family through glass. When the officiant pronounced them married, the room erupted in applause. Tyler kissed his bride with the kind of enthusiasm that made several aunts gasp with delight. The string quartet launched into something triumphant and bright, and I clapped along with everyone else, my hands coming together in rhythmic, meaningless percussion. The reception began with cocktails and passed appetizers. I stationed myself near a tall window, a glass of soda water in hand, watching the sun begin its slow descent behind the mountains. People swirled around me, laughing and hugging and exclaiming over centerpieces and dress details. Occasionally someone would glance my way, register vague recognition, and then move on. I was a Mitchell technically, but the kind of Mitchell who didn't quite warrant a full conversation. Dinner was a plated affair. Filet mignon and roasted vegetables and twice-baked potatoes with chive butter. I ate slowly, methodically, grateful for something to do with my hands. Derek kept up a running commentary about his recent promotion, his new condo in Cherry Creek, his girlfriend who couldn't make it tonight but who I'd definitely have to meet sometime. I nodded at appropriate intervals and said very little. It wasn't until dessert was being cleared that my mother finally made her way to my table. She looked radiant in a navy gown, her hair swept up in an elegant twist, a pearl necklace at her throat. She leaned down and kissed my cheek, her perfume familiar and overwhelming. "Jordan, sweetheart, I'm so glad you came." She straightened and gestured vaguely toward the head table. "Tyler was hoping you'd make it. He's been so busy with work, you know how it is. Planning a wedding on top of everything else." "I know," I said. "It's beautiful. Everything looks perfect." She smiled, pleased. "It really does, doesn't it? Vanessa has such wonderful taste. And Tyler's been doing so well at Caldwell & Associates. Richard Caldwell himself is here tonight." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He's the CEO. Very impressive man. Tyler says he's being considered for a VP position." "That's great," I said. My mother's gaze flickered over me, taking in my simple dress, my unstyled hair, the absence of any jewelry beyond small stud earrings. "And how are you, honey? Still doing the consulting work?" "Still doing it," I confirmed. "Well," she said, and there was a pause that felt loaded with unspoken. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Things. "That's good. It's good to stay busy." She patted my shoulder. "I should get back to the family table, but we'll catch up soon, okay? Maybe lunch sometime?" "Sure," I said. "Lunch sometime." She walked away, her heels clicking on the polished floor, and I watched her rejoin my father and several of Tyler's new in-laws. Nobody looked back toward table 18. Nobody wondered what I did all day in that loft apartment in Rhino. Nobody asked if consulting was code for something bigger, something real, something that might actually matter. The speeches began after dinner. Tyler's best man, a guy named Brad who I vaguely remembered from college visits, stood and delivered a toast full of inside jokes and stories about late-night study sessions and spring break adventures. Everyone laughed in the right places. Vanessa's maid of honor cried her way through a tribute about friendship and sisterhood and finding your person. My mother stood and welcomed Vanessa into the family with words about love and commitment, and the blessing of watching your child find happiness. I wasn't asked to speak. I hadn't expected to be. And then Richard Caldwell stood. He was in his early 50s, tall and distinguished with silver hair, and the kind of confident posture that came from years of leading boardrooms. He tapped his champagne glass with a fork, and the room gradually quieted. I'd met him before, once briefly 3 years ago at a tech conference in Austin. He wouldn't remember. We'd shaken hands for approximately 8 seconds before he'd moved on to someone more important. I want to say a few words about Tyler, Richard began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. He's been with Caldwell and Associates for 4 years now, and in that time he's proven himself to be not just a talented marketer, but a true leader. He paused, smiling. But tonight isn't about work. Tonight is about celebrating love and partnership, and the beginning of a new chapter. The room murmured its approval. I took another sip of soda water and wondered how much longer I needed to stay before I could reasonably slip out. But I do want to take a moment, Richard continued, to talk about something that's been on my mind lately. Something about partnership and the people who help us succeed without ever asking for credit. His tone shifted slightly, becoming more serious. At Caldwell and Associates, we rely on a piece of software called Apex Innovations. It manages everything: client relations, project timelines, team collaboration, data analytics. Without it, frankly, we'd be dead in the water. I felt my stomach tighten. My fingers pressed against the cold glass in my hand. For years, Richard said, I've worked with this company. I've spoken with their account managers, attended their webinars, benefited from their incredible customer service. But I'd never met the owner. Never even knew their name, to be honest. They keep a low profile. And tonight, completely by accident, I discovered something remarkable. He turned, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. On table 18. On the woman in the simple black dress who everyone had dismissed as the sibling who didn't quite measure up. Jordan Mitchell, he said clearly, unmistakably, is the founder and CEO of Apex Innovations. And she's sitting right here. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the polite quiet of an audience listening, but the stunned, breathless hush of a room that had just been told something impossible. I felt 200 pairs of eyes swivel toward me. I felt the weight of my mother's shocked expression, my father's confusion, Tyler's frozen smile. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I simply met Richard Caldwell's gaze across that massive ballroom and gave a single small nod. I had no idea, Richard continued, his voice warm now, almost wondering, that the person who built the technology my entire company depends on was Tyler's sister. I had no idea that the same family could produce such different kinds of excellence. He raised his glass. To Jordan Mitchell, who proves that real success doesn't need a spotlight. And to Tyler, who's lucky enough to be related to her. The room erupted. Not in applause exactly, but in a strange, disoriented buzz of conversation. People leaning toward each other, whispering urgently, glancing back at me with expressions that ranged from shock to disbelief to something that looked uncomfortably like reevaluation. Tyler stood at the head table, his face carefully blank. Vanessa touched his arm, her mouth moving in what looked like a question. My mother had gone pale. My father was staring at me like I just appeared out of thin air. Derek, sitting beside me, let out a low whistle. You own Apex? He said. Like actually own it? I set down my glass. Actually own it, I confirmed. Holy hell, he breathed. That's worth what, tens of millions? Something like that. And you've just been, what, living in some apartment and not telling anyone? I looked at him directly. Nobody asked. The rest of the reception moved in a blur of fragments, moments that didn't quite connect into a coherent whole. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly materialized at my table, drinks in hand, smiles stretched too wide. They wanted to know about the company, about how I'd started it, about whether I was hiring. They laughed too loudly at things that weren't jokes and touched my arm with a familiarity that hadn't existed 30 minutes earlier. Derek had transformed from dismissive cousin to enthusiastic supporter in the span of a single toast. He kept leaning over, stage whispering details to anyone who'd listen. She's been sitting here the whole time. Right here at table 18. Can you believe it? His girlfriend, who apparently could make it after all despite his earlier claims, appeared from somewhere and introduced herself with breathless excitement. I shook her hand and forgot her name immediately. Across the room, Tyler stood surrounded by well-wishers, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile had gone rigid. Vanessa kept glancing between us, her expression confused, trying to reconcile whatever story she'd been told about me with this new information. My mother had disappeared entirely, probably to the restroom to collect herself. My father remained at the family table, nursing a scotch and staring at nothing in particular. I excused myself before the cake cutting. Nobody tried to stop me. They were too busy recalculating, reassessing, rewriting the narrative they'd constructed about the Mitchell family's quiet disappointment. I took the elevator down alone, the mirrored walls reflecting a woman who looked exactly the same as she had 3 hours earlier but who everyone suddenly saw differently. The night air hit me as I stepped onto the street, cool and sharp with the particular clarity that comes at elevation. Denver spread out below, all lights and geometry. A city I'd left and returned to and never quite belonged in. I pulled out my phone and ordered a car, then stood on the corner waiting, watching well-dressed strangers emerge from other buildings, other celebrations, other lives that had nothing to do with mine. The drive back to Rhino took 15 minutes. I spent it staring out the window, not thinking about the reception or Richard Caldwell's revelation or my family's shocked faces. Instead, I thought about the day I'd left Denver 6 years ago, the day I decided that if they couldn't see me, I'd build something too substantial to ignore. My loft was dark when I arrived. I didn't turn on the lights immediately. Instead, I dropped my clutch on the kitchen counter, kicked off my heels, and walked to the large window that overlooked Larimer Street. Below, a few people wandered between bars and galleries, their voices carrying up through the spring air. The bike shop was closed, its metal shutters pulled down, a hand-painted sign advertising a Memorial Day sale. I'd moved into this space 8 months ago, when I decided to relocate Apex's executive operations back to Denver. The company headquarters remained in Austin, where we built our foundation and established our reputation, but I'd grown tired of Texas heat and the particular loneliness that comes from succeeding in a place where nobody knows your name. Denver had seemed like a reasonable compromise, close enough to family that I could maintain the illusion of connection, far enough that I could preserve the privacy that had become essential to my sanity. The loft itself was modest by the standards of someone worth $45 million. Exposed brick walls, polished concrete floors, industrial fixtures that the previous tenant had installed and I'd never bothered to change. My furniture was minimal, a couch I'd bought from a local craftsman, a dining table that doubled as a desk, a bed in the sleeping area that I'd assembled myself from flat-packed boxes. The only real luxury was the internet setup, fiber optic connection, mesh network, backup systems that ensured I was never more than seconds away from the company that consumed most of my waking hours. I finally turned on a single lamp and made my way to the kitchen. The coffee maker sat on the counter, an expensive Italian thing that had been a gift from Helen Zhao, my first investor and the closest thing I had to a mentor. Make good coffee, she told me when she handed it over. Everything else is easier with good coffee. I'd taken her advice on most things. The coffee maker had outlasted 3 apartment leases and 2 company pivots. I didn't make coffee though. Instead, I opened the drawer next to the sink, the one that held things I never used but couldn't quite throw away. Inside was a collection of artifacts from a life that existed parallel to the one my family knew. Business cards with my name embossed in silver, titles that evolved over the years from founder to CEO to the current version that simply said Jordan Mitchell, Apex Innovations. A laminated magazine cover from Inc., their annual list of fastest growing companies, my photo small but present in the collage of entrepreneurs who'd made the cut. A letter from the Denver Chamber of Commerce inviting me to speak at their annual summit. An award from Forbes, their 30 under 40 list, a glass rectangle that I'd shoved in this drawer because I had nowhere else to put it and no desire to display it. I pulled out the magazine and stared at my own face, professionally photographed against a neutral background, styled by someone who'd been paid to make me look successful. The interview inside was 3 pages long, full of quotes about innovation and perseverance, and the importance of solving real problems for real businesses. The journalist had asked about my background, my education, my family. I'd given vague answers, deflecting toward the company, the team, the mission. When the article was published, I'd bought 5 copies and mailed 4 of them to myself at different addresses, insurance against losing the proof that this version of myself existed. I'd never sent one to my parents. Never mentioned it at Thanksgiving or Christmas or the occasional awkward lunch where my mother asked gentle questions about whether I'd considered getting a real job. The magazine sat in this drawer instead, alongside all the other evidence of a success they decided wasn't worth acknowledging. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't have saved but recognized from the area code. Jordan, this is Richard Caldwell. I hope you don't mind Tyler giving me your contact. I wanted to apologize if I put you in an awkward position tonight. That wasn't my intention. I just thought it was remarkable that we've been working together all this time without my knowing. I'd love to buy you coffee this week if you're available. I read it twice, then set the phone face down on the counter. The apology was unnecessary but appreciated. The coffee invitation was professional courtesy mixed with genuine curiosity. Richard Caldwell hadn't built a multimillion-dollar marketing firm by being socially oblivious. He knew exactly what he'd done by revealing my identity in front of my family. Whether he'd done it deliberately or accidentally was almost irrelevant. The result was the same. Another buzz. This time from Tyler. We need to talk. Tomorrow? Name the time and place. I didn't respond to either message. Instead, I changed into sweatpants and an old t-shirt from a tech conference I'd attended 3 years ago, back when Apex was still small enough that I personally handled sales calls and customer support tickets. I pulled my hair into a messy knot and washed my face, removing the minimal makeup I'd worn to blend into the wedding crowd. The woman in the bathroom mirror looked tired but familiar, more like myself than I'd felt all evening. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the ambient noise of the neighborhood, car engines and distant music and the occasional shout from someone walking home from the bars. My mind circled the same questions on repeat. Why had Richard said anything? What did Tyler want to talk about? How would my parents react once the shock wore off? And underneath all of it, the question that mattered most, did any of this change anything real, or had I simply traded one form of invisibility for another? By 3 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I made the coffee I'd skipped earlier and sat at my dining table with my laptop, the screen's blue light harsh in the dark apartment. Email had piled up during the reception, the usual avalanche of customer inquiries and team updates and vendor requests. I worked through them methodically, grateful for problems that had clear solutions, questions that could be answered with data rather than emotion. Helen Zhao had sent a message with the subject line, "Saw the news." I opened it cautiously. Jordan, one of my contacts just told me about what happened at your brother's wedding. Richard Caldwell, right? I've known Richard for 20 years. He's a good man, but he does love a dramatic moment. Are you okay? Call me if you need to talk through anything. Also, we should discuss the Series B timing. The market conditions are shifting and I think we have a window. I smiled despite myself. Helen had invested in Apex when it was nothing but a pitch deck and a half-built prototype. She'd introduced me to her network, vouched for my credibility, and never once asked why a 28-year-old with no formal business training thought she could compete in enterprise software. When I told her about my family, about their dismissal and low expectations, she'd shrugged and said, "Their loss. Build something they can't ignore, then decide whether you want them to see it." I'd built it, and now they'd seen it. But I still wasn't sure what I wanted the outcome to be. The sky was beginning to lighten when I finally closed my laptop. Dawn in Denver is a specific kind of beautiful, the mountains going from black to purple to pink, the city waking up in stages. I stood at the window and watched it happen, the transition from night to day, the way the world looked different depending on when you chose to see it. My phone rang just after 7. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message she left. Her voice was careful, measured, the tone she used when she was trying very hard to say the right thing. "Jordan, honey, it's Mom. I just wanted to check in after last night. That was quite a surprise. I wish you'd told us about your company. We would have been so proud. Anyway, your father and I would love to take you to breakfast this week. Maybe Tuesday? Let me know. Love you." The message ended. I deleted it and made fresh coffee. Tyler called an hour later. I answered this time, curious what approach he'd take. His voice came through cheerful but strained, the sound of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "Hey Jordan. Thanks for coming last night. Vanessa loved that you made it. That wasn't true and we both knew it. Vanessa probably barely registered my presence until Richard's speech. But I let it pass. It was a beautiful wedding, I said. You both looked happy. We are, he said quickly. Really happy. Listen about what Richard said. That was wild. I had no idea you'd done so well with your business. Nobody did. I know, I said. That was intentional. A pause. Right. Yeah. I guess I'm just wondering why you never mentioned it. I mean, we're family. Don't you think we should have known? I took a sip of coffee, considering my answer. Would it have changed anything? I asked. If I told you 3 years ago that I'd started a software company, would you have been interested? Or would you have given me the same sympathetic look you give me every Thanksgiving when I say I'm doing consulting work? That's not fair, Tyler said, but his protest was weak. We've always supported you. You've always tolerated me, I corrected. There's a difference. Support means asking questions. It means caring about the answers. Tolerance is just waiting for someone to become less embarrassing. Silence on the other end. I could picture him in his new house, probably in the kitchen of whatever upscale property he and Vanessa had purchased, his phone pressed to his ear while he tried to figure out how to salvage this conversation. Look, he said finally, I'm not trying to fight. I just think we should talk. Really talk. Maybe I haven't been the best brother. Maybe I didn't ask enough questions. But I'd like to fix that. Can we meet for lunch? Tomorrow? I'm busy tomorrow, I said. It wasn't true, but it also wasn't negotiable. Okay, what about Wednesday? Thursday? Just name a day, Jordan. I want to make this right. I'll check my calendar and let you know, I said. Congratulations again on the wedding. I ended the call before he could respond. The apartment felt too quiet afterward, the kind of silence that made every small sound seem amplified. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the building's old pipes clicking as someone upstairs ran water, my own breathing steady and deliberate. The truth was, I didn't want lunch with Tyler. I didn't want breakfast with my parents. I didn't want any version of reconciliation that started with them feeling obligated to acknowledge me now that someone important had validated my existence. For 6 years, I'd been building Apex while they'd been building a narrative about my failure. Richard Caldwell's speech hadn't changed who I was. It had only changed how they saw me, and I wasn't convinced that was worth celebrating. The office on Monday morning felt like sanctuary. Apex Innovations occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the Denver Tech Center, all glass walls and open workspaces and meeting rooms named after mountains I'd climbed during the early startup days when stress management meant hiking until my legs gave out. I arrived at 6:30, earlier than usual, and spent the first hour alone with my coffee and the quarterly reports that needed review before our board meeting on Friday. By 8, the space began filling with engineers and designers and account managers, people who knew me as Jordan, sometimes as JM, occasionally as boss, but never with the kind of formal distance that made leadership feel like performance. I'd built Apex with the specific intention of creating a place where good work mattered more than hierarchy, where someone's value came from what they contributed rather than how well they played corporate politics. It wasn't always perfect. We had our share of conflicts and miscommunications and projects that failed despite everyone's best efforts. But it felt honest in a way most companies didn't. Marissa Chun, my director of operations, knocked on my office door around 9. She was carrying 2 folders and wearing an expression I recognized as her diplomatic face, the one she used when she had to deliver news I wouldn't want to hear. I waved her in and she sat across from my desk, setting the folders down with careful precision. So, she started, I have regular Monday updates. But first I need to ask about something I saw on LinkedIn over the weekend. Her tone was neutral but her eyes were curious. Richard Caldwell posted about you. Something about discovering you were Apex's founder at a family wedding. It's gotten about 3,000 likes and 200 comments. Most of them are people tagging other people and saying things like this is wild or can you imagine? I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. I didn't know he was going to post about it. Did you know he was going to announce it at the wedding? Not until he was already talking. I picked up my coffee mug, found it empty, set it back down. He seemed genuinely surprised to discover the connection. Marissa nodded slowly. Well, it's creating some buzz. We've had 47 new inquiries since Saturday night. Companies wanting demos, consultants asking about partnership opportunities, a few journalists requesting interviews. She opened the first folder and slid it toward me. I had Jamie compile the legitimate ones. The rest are probably just noise. I scanned the list. Several names I recognized, mid-size firms and industries we've been trying to break into for months. A few venture capital groups whose interests seemed premature given we weren't currently fundraising. 3 journalists from respectable publications asking about the company's origin story and growth trajectory. Define noise, I said. People who want to pitch you their services, recruiters fishing for information about our hiring plans, someone who claims they invested in the idea 5 years ago and deserves equity. She smiled slightly. The usual aftermath of any public attention. I'll review these and get back to you by end of day. What else? She opened the second folder. Caldwell & Associates is up for contract renewal in 6 weeks. Their account rep wants to schedule a call to discuss expanding their package. Given the circumstances, I wasn't sure if you wanted to handle that personally or delegate it. The circumstances being that my brother works there, and his boss just publicly connected us in front of 200 wedding guests. I leaned back in my chair. Does their rep know about the connection? If they didn't before, they definitely do now. Everyone does. It's not exactly subtle when the CEO posts about it on social media. I considered this. Caldwell & Associates had been a client for 3 years. One of our earliest enterprise accounts and a steady source of revenue that had helped us survive the precarious middle phase when we were too big to be scrappy, but too small to be stable. They paid on time, their team actually used the software as intended, and their feedback had shaped several features that made the product better for everyone. Losing them would hurt, not fatally but enough to notice. Set up the call, I said. I'll take it. But make sure someone from customer success is on the line too. I don't want this to look like special treatment just because of Richard's speech. Marissa made a note. Anything else you want me to know? She asked it carefully, the question of a person who'd worked closely enough with me to recognize when something was off. My family didn't know about the company until Saturday night. They still don't really know anything about it. And I'd like to keep it that way for as long as possible. She didn't ask why. That was one of the things I appreciated most about Marissa. She understood that some explanations weren't owed, even to people you trusted. Understood, she said. I'll make sure the team knows to redirect any personal inquiries to me. If anyone claiming to be family tries to get information, we'll handle it through official channels. Thank you. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think it's impressive that you built all this while dealing with people who didn't see you. Most people would have spent that energy trying to prove themselves to the doubters. You just built something undeniable instead. After she left, I sat in the quiet of my office and thought about what undeniable actually meant. Apex had revenue and clients and a valuation that venture capitalists found interesting. We had a product that solved real problems and a team that mostly enjoyed coming to work. By conventional metrics, we'd succeeded. But success had turned out to be more complicated than I'd expected when I was 28 and angry and determined to prove everyone wrong. The anger had faded somewhere along the way. What remained was a kind of protective distance, a moat I'd built around myself that kept people from getting close enough to dismiss me again. It worked professionally. I was respected, sometimes even admired, by people who understood what it took to build a company from nothing. But personally, it had left me isolated in ways I was only beginning to recognize. My phone buzzed with another text from Tyler. I know you're busy, but I really think we should talk soon. This isn't just about the wedding. There are some things I need to tell you. Please. I stared at the message for a long moment, then archived it without responding. Whatever Tyler needed to tell me could wait. I had work to do, the kind of work that came with clear objectives and measurable outcomes, unlike family relationships that seem to exist in a perpetual state of undefined obligation. The rest of Monday disappeared into meetings and code reviews, and a budgeting session that ran 2 hours longer than scheduled. By the time I left the office, it was past 8 and the sun had already set, leaving Denver's skyline illuminated against the dark sky. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool air clear my head, trying not to think about the voicemail notification that had appeared from my father during the afternoon. Tuesday brought another message from my mother. This one via email with the subject line "just checking in." The body was brief and carefully casual. "Hi honey, haven't heard back about breakfast. No pressure, but we'd really love to see you. Maybe this weekend? Let me know what works." She'd signed it with love, Mom, and a string of heart emojis that felt incongruous with 6 years of benign neglect. I archived that too and spent the day in back-to-back product demos, showing potential clients how Apex could streamline their operations and save them money, and generally make their professional lives less chaotic. I was good at demos. There was a rhythm to them, a structure that made sense. Identify the pain point, show the solution, handle objections with data and case studies, close with a clear call to action. No ambiguity, no unspoken subtext, just a straightforward exchange of value. Wednesday afternoon, Richard Caldwell's assistant called to confirm our contract renewal meeting for the following week. Her voice was professionally friendly, the kind of warm efficiency that came from years of managing a CEO's calendar. Mr. Caldwell wanted me to let you know he's looking forward to the conversation, she said. He's been very impressed with how Apex has scaled, and he's interested in discussing some expanded applications for our team. That sounds great, I said. I'll have our customer success director on the call, as well, to address any technical questions. Perfect. And he asked me to pass along that he hopes you're doing well after the wedding. He felt terrible about potentially causing any family awkwardness. Please tell him no apology necessary. It was bound to come out eventually. After I hung up, I pulled up Caldwell & Associates account history. 3 years of steady usage, consistent growth in the number of seats they licensed, excellent utilization rates across all features. Their team had submitted 42 support tickets in that time, none of them unreasonable, most of them resulting in product improvements that benefited everyone. They were model clients, the kind of account that made the business sustainable. They were also my brother's employer, which meant every interaction from now on would carry weight it hadn't carried before. That evening, I finally listened to my father's voicemail. His voice was more tentative than my mother's, less practiced in the art of emotional navigation. Jordan, it's Dad. Your mother and I have been trying to reach you. We'd really like to talk about your company and, well, about a lot of things. I know we haven't been as present as we should have been. That's on us. But we'd like a chance to do better. Call me back when you can. The message was 53 seconds long. In it, my father said more about our relationship than he'd said in the previous 6 years combined. It should have felt like progress. Instead, it felt like confirmation that visibility required validation from outside sources. Richard Caldwell's speech had done more to make me real to my family than anything I'd accomplished on my own. I didn't call back. Not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. Sorry I didn't tell you I built a $45 million company. I've been busy. Thanks for finally noticing me now that someone important confirmed I'm worth noticing. I couldn't find words that didn't sound bitter or defensive, so I chose silence instead. Thursday morning brought an unexpected visitor to the office. I was in a meeting with our engineering lead, discussing the technical debt we needed to address before the next major release, when Marissa appeared at the conference room door with an apologetic expression. Sorry to interrupt, but you have someone in reception who says they're family. Your brother. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insisting it's important. I felt every muscle in my body tense. Does he know this is my office? He figured it out. Said he looked up the company address and took a chance you'd be here. The engineering lead, a woman named Priya who'd been with Apex since the early days, raised her eyebrows but said nothing. I appreciated her discretion. Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes, I said to Marissa. Then to Priya, can we pick this up this afternoon? Of course. She gathered her laptop and notes. Family stuff? Something like that. Good luck. I took the stairs down to reception instead of the elevator, using the extra time to prepare myself for whatever version of Tyler I was about to encounter. The reception area was designed to be welcoming but impressive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tech center, comfortable seating, a living wall of plants that our office manager tended with almost obsessive care. Tyler stood near the windows, hands in his pockets, wearing slacks and a button-down that suggested he'd come from work. He turned when he heard my footsteps. His smile was uncertain, missing the confident polish I associated with him. Jordan, thanks for seeing me. I know I should have called first. We have a conference room policy, I said. Visitors need appointments. But you're here now. There's a coffee shop in the building lobby. We can talk there. I didn't want him in my office. Didn't want him seeing the space I'd built, meeting the people who knew me as someone competent and capable. This conversation, whatever it was, needed to happen on neutral ground. The coffee shop was busy with the late morning crowd, people on laptops and phones, the ambient noise of a place designed for productivity. We ordered drinks, Tyler insisting on paying even though I made clear it wasn't necessary, and found a table near the back where we'd have some privacy. He wrapped his hands around his cup, staring at it like it might contain answers. I've been trying to figure out what to say for 4 days, he started. Every version sounds either defensive or patronizing or just completely inadequate. You could start with why you're here. He looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since we'd sat down. Because I've been an ass. Because I spent 6 years assuming you were struggling and feeling sorry for you, and never once asking if that assumption was even true. Because Richard's speech made me realize I don't actually know anything about your life. You didn't want to know, I said. There's a difference between not knowing and not asking. You're right. He said it quickly, like he'd been expecting the accusation. You're absolutely right. And I can't go back and fix that. But I'm here now and I'm asking. Tell me about Apex. Tell me how you built it. Tell me anything you want me to know. I took a drink of my coffee, buying time to decide how honest to be. The easy version was the elevator pitch I gave to investors and clients, the story of identifying a market gap and building a solution and scaling through strategic partnerships. But Tyler wasn't a potential client. He was my brother, or at least he used to be, and maybe he deserved the harder truth. I started Apex 6 years ago in Austin because I needed to prove I could build something that mattered, I said. Not to you or mom or dad, but to myself. After business school rejected me, after everyone made it clear I was the sibling who couldn't keep up, I decided that if I was going to fail, I'd fail on my own terms doing something I believed in. I didn't know business school rejected you. You didn't ask. Nobody did. They just assumed I wasn't ambitious enough to apply. Tyler winced but didn't interrupt. I spent the first year teaching myself to code and talking to small business owners about their problems. The second year building a prototype and testing it with anyone who'd give me feedback. The third year barely breaking even but adding features and fixing bugs and slowly getting traction. By year 4 we were profitable. By year 5 we had enterprise clients and a team of 60 people. And through all of it, through every milestone and setback and small victory, not one person in our family asked me how it was going. Because we thought you were just doing freelance consulting, Tyler said quietly. That's what you told us. I told you I was doing consulting work. Which was technically true. I consulted on building a company. You all assumed that meant I was struggling, and I let you assume it because correcting you felt exhausting. It felt like trying to convince people I was visible when they'd already decided I was background noise. He was quiet for a long moment processing this. Then, so why come back to Denver? Why not stay in Austin where you built everything? Because I was tired of being successful in a place where it didn't matter. The success felt hollow when the only people who knew about it were employees and clients and investors. I thought maybe if I moved back, eventually someone would notice. Eventually someone would ask the right question and I could stop carrying this secret alone. And then Richard asked the question for you. Not the way I would have chosen. But yes. Tyler leaned back in his chair. His coffee forgotten. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. I don't know how to make up for 6 years of being oblivious. But I want to try. If you'll let me. I studied him across the table, this person who shared my genetics and my childhood and almost nothing of my adult life. He looked sincere. He probably was sincere. But sincerity didn't erase the years of dismissal, the casual cruelty of low expectations, the loneliness of being invisible to the people who were supposed to know you best. I don't need you to fix anything, I said finally. And I don't need you to make up for lost time. What I need is for you to understand that the relationship we had or didn't have was a choice. Your choice. And now that you know I'm successful, now that someone you respect has validated my worth, you want a different relationship. But I'm not sure I do. His face fell. You don't want me in your life at all? Didn't say that. I'm saying I don't know yet what I want. And I'm not going to make that decision based on guilt or obligation or some idea that family means automatic access to each other's lives. If we're going to have a relationship, it needs to be built on something real. Not on you feeling bad about underestimating me. That's fair, he said, though his voice suggested it wasn't what he'd hoped to hear. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you come to the wedding? If you knew we didn't really see you, if you'd given up on us caring, why show up at all? I thought about this. Because somewhere underneath all the disappointment and distance, there was still a small part of me that hoped maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time someone would ask me a real question or see past their assumptions or just treat me like I mattered. It was a foolish hope. But I showed up anyway. And Richard's speech, Tyler said. Did that change anything? The way you feel about us? Changed what you know about me. But it didn't change what I know about you. The speech was just information. What matters is what you do with it. Tyler left the coffee shop with promises to give me space, to respect my boundaries, to prove through actions rather than words that he wanted something different. I watched him walk toward the parking garage and felt nothing, not relief or satisfaction or even anger, just a kind of hollow acknowledgement that some conversations needed to happen even when they didn't solve anything. The rest of Thursday passed in a haze of routine tasks. I reviewed contracts, approved budget requests, sat through a presentation about expanding our customer support infrastructure. Normal work, the kind that kept a company running but didn't require the intense focus that made hours disappear. By the time I left the office, the sky had darkened and traffic had thinned to the die-hard commuters who stayed late either by choice or necessity. My phone rang as I pulled into my building's parking area. Helen Zhao's name appeared on the screen. I answered through the car's Bluetooth system. "Helen, what's up?" Her voice came through clear and direct, the way she always spoke. "I'm calling about 3 things. First, congratulations on becoming LinkedIn famous. Richard's post has been making rounds in my network all week. Second, we need to schedule that Series B conversation because I have 2 firms asking about Apex and I want to make sure we're aligned on timing and valuation expectations. Third, and this is the real reason I'm calling, are you okay?" I turned off the ignition and sat in the dark car. Define okay. Jordan, I've known you for 6 years. I know what your voice sounds like when you're excited about a product pivot or frustrated with a difficult client or exhausted from working too many consecutive 14-hour days. Right now you sound like someone going through motions. So I'm asking as your friend, not your investor, are you okay? The kindness in her question unlocked something I'd been keeping carefully controlled all week. My family didn't know I'd built this company until Saturday, I said. They spent 6 years thinking I was barely getting by. And now that someone they respect told them otherwise, they want to be involved. They want lunches and conversations and a relationship they never bothered to build when it might have actually mattered. Helen was quiet for a moment. "That's hard," she said finally. "Having people show up after the hard part is over. It makes me feel like everything I built was just to prove them wrong. Like I spent 6 years and millions of dollars and most of my emotional energy on the world's most expensive revenge project. And maybe that's exactly what it was. Or maybe," Helen said, "you built something meaningful despite them, not because of them. Maybe they're just now catching up to what you've known all along, that you're capable of extraordinary things regardless of whether anyone's watching." I leaned my head back against the seat. How do I know the difference? How do I know if I built Apex because I believed in it or because I needed to prove I wasn't the failure they thought I was? Does it matter? The company exists either way. The team has jobs either way. The clients are getting value either way. Your motivation 6 years ago doesn't change what you've created today. "It matters to me," I said quietly, "because if I only did this to prove a point, what happens now that the point is proven? What do I do with a company I built for the wrong reasons?" You do what you've always done. You show up and solve problems and make decisions that move things forward. And eventually you figure out what the right reasons are, not because someone gave them to you but because you discovered them by doing the work. We talked for another 20 minutes about Series B timing and market conditions, and which venture firms she thought would be the best cultural fit. By the time we hung up, I felt marginally more grounded, like I'd been reminded that Apex existed beyond my family drama, that it had value independent of whether anyone acknowledged my role in creating it. Friday brought the board meeting I'd been dreading all week. Not because of the content, the quarterly numbers were strong and we had good momentum heading into the back half of the year, but because I knew I'd have to address the sudden public attention. Our board consisted of Helen, 2 other early investors, and our CFO who joined when we raised our Series A. They were all practical people who cared primarily about growth metrics and unit economics, but they also understood that unexpected publicity could create complications. Helen opened the meeting by acknowledging the elephant in the room. "I think we all saw Richard Caldwell's LinkedIn post," she said. Before we get into the quarterly review, let's talk about what this means for the company. Jordan, do you want to give us your read on the situation? I walked them through the wedding, Richard's speech, the spike in inquiries, and the general attention the post had generated. I kept my tone factual, treating it like any other business development we needed to analyze. The good news is we're seeing interest from companies we've been trying to reach for months. The complicated news is that some of this attention is personal rather than professional, and we need to be thoughtful about how we manage that boundary. One of the investors, a man named Greg who'd made his fortune in enterprise software before moving into venture capital, leaned forward. When you say personal attention, are we talking about family members trying to get involved in the company? Not directly, but there are relationship complications that could become distracting if not handled properly. I'm working on keeping those separate from business operations. Greg nodded. For what it's worth, I think this could be a net positive if we use it strategically. Founder stories matter in our space. The narrative of building something significant while being underestimated by the people closest to you, that resonates. It's authentic underdog positioning. I appreciate that perspective, I said carefully. But I'm not interested in making my family dynamics part of our marketing strategy. The company needs to stand on its own merits, not on the novelty of my personal situation. Fair enough, Greg said. Just know the option is there if you change your mind. The rest of the meeting focused on the numbers. Revenue was up 18% quarter over quarter. Customer retention remained above 93%. We'd hired 12 new people and had requisitions open for 8 more. The product roadmap was ambitious but achievable. By every measurable standard, Apex was succeeding. So why did I feel like I was piloting something I no longer fully controlled? After the board members left, Helen stayed behind. We walked to my office and she closed the door, settling into the chair across from my desk with the ease of someone who'd been in this room countless times before. Talk to me, she said. What's really going on? I don't know if I want to do this anymore. The words surprised us both. I hadn't planned to say them, hadn't consciously acknowledged the thought until it was already in the air between us. Helen didn't react with shock or concern. She just watched me steadily, waiting for me to continue. I've been running this company for 6 years, I said slowly, trying to articulate something I barely understood myself. 6 years of every decision, every crisis, every small victory and massive setback. And somewhere along the way it stopped feeling like something I wanted and started feeling like something I had to prove. Had to protect. Had to keep building because stopping would mean admitting I'd spent all this time and energy on something that maybe wasn't actually mine. What do you mean it wasn't yours? I mean, maybe I built it for them. For my family, for everyone who thought I couldn't. And if that's true, if the whole foundation of this company is just me trying to prove I'm worth seeing, then what's the point? They see me now. Richard made sure of that. So what do I do with a company that served its purpose? Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'm going to tell you something I've never told you before. When I first invested in Apex, it wasn't because of your pitch deck or your market analysis or your technical capabilities, though those were all solid. It was because you were the first founder I'd met in years who was building something for the right reason. What reason? Because it needed to exist. Not because you needed to get rich or famous or prove something to anyone, but because you saw a real problem that wasn't being solved and you had an idea for how to solve it better. That clarity of purpose is rare. Most founders are running from something or towards something that has nothing to do with the actual work. But you just wanted to build something useful. Maybe I used to feel that way, but I'm not sure I do anymore. Helen leaned forward. So figure out if you still believe the problem matters. Not whether your family sees you, not whether Richard Caldwell validates you, not whether venture capitalists think you're impressive. Just, does the problem Apex solves still matter to you? Because if it does, you keep building. And if it doesn't, we figure out a transition plan that's fair to everyone involved. But either way, you don't make that decision based on your family's opinion. I looked out the window at the Denver skyline, buildings catching the late afternoon light, the mountains visible in the distance. Somewhere in one of those buildings, Tyler was probably at his desk using Apex software to manage his projects and communicate with his team, completely unaware that the tool he relied on daily was built by the sister he'd dismissed for years. The irony would have been funny if it didn't feel so exhausting. I need time to think, I told Helen. Time to figure out what I actually want instead of just reacting to what everyone else wants from me. Take it, she said. Take whatever time you need. The company will be fine for a few weeks without you micromanaging every decision. That's what having good people is for. The weekend arrived with a relief that felt disproportionate to my actual plans, which consisted of virtually nothing. I turned off my work phone Friday evening and didn't turn it back on until Monday morning. I ignored texts from my parents and Tyler. I ordered takeout and watched movies I'd already seen and slept later than I had in months. Sunday afternoon, I drove up to Golden and hiked the trail behind Lookout Mountain, pushing myself until my legs burned and my lungs protested the altitude. At the top, I sat on a flat rock and looked out over the city sprawling below. All the lives happening simultaneously. All the private struggles and quiet victories that never made it to LinkedIn or wedding toasts. My phone had no service up there. For 2 hours, I existed completely disconnected from email and texts and the constant pull of problems that needed solving. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken since Saturday night. When I got back to my car, service returned along with a flood of notifications. Most of them I ignored, but one caught my attention. An email from Richard Caldwell with the subject line, "No pressure, just gratitude." I opened it sitting in the parking lot, my hiking boots still dusty, my hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Jordan, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to reach out personally to apologize if my speech at Tyler's wedding created any discomfort for you or your family. That truly wasn't my intention. I was simply surprised and delighted to discover that the person who built the software we depend on daily was sitting in the same room. In my enthusiasm, I may have been insensitive to the complexity of your family dynamics. I also wanted you to know that my admiration for Apex isn't based on any personal connection. Your company earned our business 3 years ago because it solved problems our previous systems couldn't touch. The fact that you're Tyler's sister is irrelevant to the quality of your product and team. I mention this because I imagine the next few weeks will involve people treating you differently based on my public comments, and I want to be clear that your success stands on its own merit. I'm looking forward to our contract renewal conversation. Regardless of what you decide about continuing our business relationship, please know that Caldwell and Associates will remain grateful clients for as long as you'll have us. With respect and appreciation, Richard. I read it twice, surprised by how much the message mattered. Not because I needed Richard's validation, but because he understood something my own family hadn't grasped. That recognition didn't create value. It only revealed value that had always been there. Monday morning came too quickly. I arrived at the office to find Marissa waiting with her usual folders and her diplomatic expression. "Welcome back," she said. "How was your weekend of radio silence?" "Necessary. What disaster am I walking into?" "No disasters. A few situations that require your attention, but nothing that couldn't wait until you were ready." She opened the first folder. "Tyler called the main line 3 times. I told him you were unavailable and took messages. Your parents called twice. Same response. We had 2 more journalists request interviews, including one from TechCrunch who's doing a piece on bootstrap success stories. Pass on the interviews. I'm not interested in being a case study right now." "Understood. Also, the Caldwell contract renewal call is scheduled for Wednesday at 2. I've briefed Priya from customer success and she's prepared to walk through technical details if needed." "Good. Anything else?" "One more thing." She pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This came for you Saturday. Delivered by courier to reception." I took the paper. It was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery, the kind of cream-colored paper that suggested old money and traditional values. The handwriting was unfamiliar but elegant. "Dear Jordan, I hope you'll forgive the intrusion of a stranger's correspondence. My name is Alex Rivera and I run a small venture fund focused on founder-owned companies that prioritize sustainable growth over explosive exits. Richard Caldwell is a friend and investor in several of my portfolio companies. After his post about discovering you were Apex's founder, he called to tell me the full story, not the LinkedIn version, but the real version about building something significant while being profoundly underestimated. I'm writing not to pitch you on investment, you clearly don't need it, but to invite you to coffee. I host a monthly gathering of founders who've built successful companies while navigating complicated personal circumstances. No formal agenda, no networking pressure, Just honest conversation with people who understand what it's like to succeed in isolation. Our next meeting is Thursday evening at Stella's Brew on 16th Street. If you're interested, just show up. If not, I hope this letter at least reminds you that you're not alone in feeling alone. The letter included a phone number and email address, but no pressure to respond. I folded it carefully and looked at Marissa. Did you read this? The courier said it was personal, so I didn't open it. Should I have? No. You did exactly right. I slipped the letter into my bag. Thanks for holding down the fort while I was disconnected. That's what you pay me for. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, you seem different today. More settled. Just needed some space to think. Well, whatever conclusions you came to, I hope they were good ones. After she left, I sat at my desk and pulled out the letter again. Alex Rivera's invitation felt like an unexpected gift. An acknowledgement that the loneliness I'd been carrying wasn't unique or shameful, but simply part of an experience that others had navigated before me. I didn't know if I'd go to the Thursday gathering, but knowing it existed, knowing there were other people who'd built things while being invisible to the people who should have seen them, that helped in ways I hadn't anticipated. Wednesday's contract renewal call with Caldwell and Associates went smoothly. Richard was professional and enthusiastic, asking thoughtful questions about new features and expanded capabilities. Tyler was on the call too, his role apparently including oversight of the tools his team used. He stayed quiet for most of the conversation, letting Richard and Priya handle the technical details. Near the end, Richard said, "Before we wrap up, I want to personally thank you, Jordan, for building a product that's genuinely made our work better. It's rare to find software that actually delivers on its promises. The fact that it's built by someone with Tyler's last name is pure coincidence as far as I'm concerned. You earned our business the same way you'll keep it, by being excellent at what you do. I appreciate that, Richard. And I appreciate you being willing to separate family dynamics from business relationships. Not everyone would have that clarity." After the call ended, Tyler sent me a private message through Apex's chat system. "Thank you for taking that call. I know it probably felt weird having me on the line. For what it's worth, I meant what I said at the coffee shop. I'm trying to do better." I typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on something simple. I know. Give it time. Thursday evening, I found myself walking into Stella's Brew without having consciously decided to go. The coffee shop was cozy and warm, all exposed brick and mismatched furniture, and the smell of fresh espresso. In the back corner, a group of about 8 people sat in a loose circle, talking and laughing with the easy comfort of people who knew each other well. A woman in her 40s looked up as I approached. She had dark hair pulled into a casual bun and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Jordan?" she asked. "I'm Alex. I'm so glad you came." She introduced me to the group. A man who'd built a successful consulting firm while caring for a parent with dementia. A woman who'd launched a sustainable fashion brand while navigating a divorce that left her financially devastated. A non-binary entrepreneur who'd created an education platform while estranged from their family of origin. Each person had a story of building something meaningful while carrying weight that no one else could see. We talked for 2 hours. Not about metrics or valuations or growth strategies, but about the cost of succeeding alone. About the strange grief that came with finally being recognized for things you'd already processed. About the question of whether you kept building once the people who dismissed you finally showed up wanting a piece of what you'd created. A man named David, who'd sold his company for $80 million 3 years earlier, said something that lodged in my chest and stayed there. The hardest part wasn't building the company. It was figuring out who I was after I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I'd spent so long being the person everyone underestimated that when I finally succeeded, I didn't know how to just exist without that chip on my shoulder. It took me 2 years and a lot of therapy to realize I could build things for myself instead of against other people's expectations. "Is that what you do now?" I asked. "Build for yourself?" He smiled. "Most days. Some days I still catch myself trying to prove something to people who don't matter anymore. But I'm getting better at recognizing when that's happening and choosing something different." As the gathering wound down, Alex walked me out to my car. "I'm glad you came," she said. "This group has been meeting for 3 years and every person here has told me at some point that they thought they were the only one who felt this way. That specific combination of success and isolation, it's more common than people realize. Why don't more people talk about it?" Because we're supposed to be grateful, she said simply. We're supposed to feel victorious about proving everyone wrong. Admitting that the victory feels hollow or complicated or lonely, that doesn't fit the narrative we're supposed to tell. So most people just carry it quietly and wonder why success doesn't feel the way they expected. I drove home thinking about David's words, about building for yourself instead of against someone else's expectations. The idea felt foreign and appealing in equal measure. For 6 years, I'd known exactly what I was building and why. Apex existed because I needed to prove I wasn't the failure my family assumed. Every feature, every client, every milestone was evidence in an argument I was having with people who weren't listening. But what would I build if I stopped arguing? What would Apex become if I ran it for myself instead of for them? The following Tuesday, my parents finally caught me. I'd been avoiding their calls and texts for 2 weeks, but my mother showed up at my apartment building Tuesday evening, waiting in the lobby with the kind of patient determination that suggested she'd wait all night if necessary. I saw her through the glass doors as I approached from the parking area. For a moment, I considered turning around, getting back in my car, driving somewhere else until she gave up. But that felt childish and exhausting in equal measure. So I pushed through the doors and met her in the small lobby that smelled of cleaning products and old carpet. "Hi, Mom." She stood up from the bench where she'd been sitting, her purse clutched in both hands. "Jordan, thank you for not running away. I almost did. I know. That's why I'm thanking you." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can we talk? Maybe in your apartment? I don't really want to do this right now. I understand. But I've been sitting here for 40 minutes rehearsing what I want to say. And if I don't say it now, I'm afraid I'll lose my nerve. So please, just give me 10 minutes. We rode the elevator in silence. I unlocked my apartment and she followed me in, looking around at the space I'd lived in for 8 months without ever inviting her to see. She took in the exposed brick, the minimal furniture, the lack of personal decorations that might reveal anything meaningful about my life. "This is nice," she said. "Very you. You don't know what's me," I said. It came out harder than I intended, but I didn't soften it. She flinched but nodded. "You're right. I don't. And that's what I came here to say. I don't know you, Jordan. I don't know what you've built or what it cost you or how you managed to do something so significant while your father and I were busy worrying about whether you'd ever figure your life out. So now you know. Does that change anything?" "Changes everything," she said. "Changes how I see the last 6 years. It changes how I understand every conversation we had where I offered unsolicited advice about job hunting or going back to school. It changes my entire understanding of who my daughter is." I sat down on my couch, suddenly exhausted. "The thing is, Mom, it doesn't actually change who I am. I'm the same person I was 3 weeks ago. The only thing that changed is that someone you respect told you I was worth paying attention to. And I don't know how to have a relationship with you knowing that external validation is what it took for you to finally see me." She sat in the chair across from me, her purse now in her lap, her hands twisted together. "You're angry with me. With us." "I'm not angry. I'm just tired. Tired of being invisible and then suddenly visible and not being sure which version is worse." My mother was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I can't undo the last 6 years. I can't go back and ask the questions I should have asked or show the interest I should have shown. All I can do is start now and hope that eventually you'll believe me when I say I want to know you. The real you, not the version I assumed you were." "Why now?" I asked. "Why does it matter now when it didn't matter before?" "Because I'm ashamed," she said, and her voice broke slightly. "I'm ashamed that my daughter built something extraordinary, and I was too self-involved to notice. I'm ashamed that it took a stranger's speech at a wedding to make me realize I've been failing you for years. And I'm ashamed that even now, sitting here, part of me is thinking about how this reflects on me as a mother, rather than what it must have felt like for you. At least you're honest about it. It's the least I owe you." We talked for another hour. Not about reconciliation or promises or dramatic gestures, but about the small concrete ways she might start to actually know me. She asked about Apex, about how I'd started it, about what the day-to-day work actually involved. She asked about my apartment, about why I'd chosen this neighborhood, about whether I liked living here. She asked questions that had simple answers but that added up to something bigger, a foundation of actual knowledge rather than assumption. When she left, she hugged me briefly at the door. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I should have said that 6 years ago. I should have been saying it all along. But I'm saying it now and I mean it. I know, I said. And maybe eventually that will be enough. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm. I showed up at the office and ran the company with the same competence I always had. I attended Alex's monthly gatherings and found comfort in conversations with people who understood complexity that came with succeeding despite, rather than because of. I had occasional coffee with Tyler, who was genuinely trying to build something real between us even though we both knew it would take time. I had dinner with my parents once, then twice, slowly constructing a relationship based on who I actually was rather than who they'd assumed I'd be. And somewhere in all of that, I realized I was still showing up to Apex every day not because I had something to prove, but because the problems we solved still mattered to me. The work was meaningful independent of whether anyone validated it. The team was building something useful that made people's professional lives genuinely better. That purpose had gotten buried under years of using the company as proof of worth, but it had been there all along, waiting for me to remember it. 3 months after the wedding, I sat in my office after everyone else had gone home and pulled out the letter I'd written to myself when I first started Apex. It was dated 6 years earlier, written on a night when I was terrified and determined in equal measure. The letter reminded me why I'd started, what problem I believed needed solving, what kind of company I wanted to build if I ever got the chance. Reading it now, I could see how much I'd drifted from those original intentions. How much energy I'd spent on proving rather than building. How much of myself I'd poured into external validation instead of internal purpose. But I could also see that the foundation was still there. The reason Apex existed, the problem it solved, the value it created, that hadn't changed. I just lost sight of it while fighting battles that ultimately didn't matter. I wrote a new letter that night. Not to my past self, but to my future self. A reminder that success measured by other people's recognition would always be unstable. That the only sustainable foundation was building something I believed in regardless of who was watching. That being invisible had been painful, but being visible on someone else's terms wasn't actually better. The letter ended with a single question: if everyone stopped paying attention tomorrow, would you still show up? And for the first time in 6 years, I could answer honestly, yes. Not because I had something to prove, but because the work itself was worth doing. 6 months after the wedding, Tyler got promoted to VP at Caldwell & Associates. He called to tell me the news, his voice bright with genuine excitement. Richard said part of the reason was my leadership on integrating Apex more deeply into our workflows. So in a weird way, you helped me get here. I'm glad, I told him. You've worked hard for this. We're having a small celebration dinner next week. Just family. Mom and Dad really want you there. And this time, he paused, this time they actually want you there. Not just to fill a seat. They've been asking about you, about the company, about your life. Real questions. I'll think about it. That's more than I deserve, honestly. The dinner happened. I went, dressed in clothes I chose for myself rather than to blend in. My parents asked questions and listened to the answers. Tyler made jokes that were actually funny rather than dismissive. Vanessa, who I barely knew, told me she'd been following Apex's growth and thought what I'd built was remarkable. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, still gaps where 6 years of distance couldn't be bridged in a single evening. But it was real. Messy and incomplete and honest in ways our family had never been before. At the end of the night, my father walked me to my car. He was quiet for most of the walk, then stopped before I got in. I need to say something, he started. About those years when you were building Apex and we didn't know. I told myself we were giving you space to figure things out. That we were being supportive by not pressuring you. But the truth is, I was embarrassed. Embarrassed that my daughter wasn't following a traditional path, wasn't doing something I could easily explain to colleagues and friends. And that embarrassment made me blind to what you were actually accomplishing. I appreciate you saying that. I don't expect you to forgive us immediately. Or maybe ever. But I want you to know that I see you now. Not just the company or the success, but you. The person who built something meaningful despite everyone telling her she wasn't measuring up. That takes a kind of strength I'm not sure I have. And I'm sorry it took me this long to recognize it. We stood in the parking lot for a moment, the Denver night cool around us, the mountains invisible in the darkness but present in the way they were always present here, solid and unchanging and older than anyone's opinion. I'm still figuring out how to do this, I said. How to let you all in after keeping you out for so long. But I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. I drove home thinking about Alex's gathering, about David's words about building for yourself, about the new letter I'd written to my future self, about the question I could finally answer honestly. Apex would keep growing because the problems it solved still mattered. My family would keep showing up because they were finally willing to see me. And I would keep choosing to exist not as proof of anything, but as myself, fully visible on my own terms. The office felt different after that. Not because anything had changed structurally, but because I'd stopped carrying the weight of invisibility into every decision. The work was still challenging. The problems were still complex. But they were just work and problems, not evidence in an argument I was having with ghosts. 1 year after the wedding, Richard Caldwell invited me to speak at an industry conference about building sustainable companies in competitive markets. I almost said no. Public speaking had never been something I enjoyed, and part of me still resisted being visible in ways that invited scrutiny. But Helen convinced me to do it. This isn't about your family anymore, she said. This is about other founders who are building in isolation and need to hear that it's possible, that you can succeed despite being underestimated. That recognition doesn't create value, it just reveals it. The speech went well. I talked about Apex's growth, about the technical challenges we'd solved, about the importance of building for the right reasons. I didn't mention my family, didn't talk about being invisible or finally being seen, just focused on the work, the problems, the solutions. Afterward, a young woman approached me, probably in her mid-20s, with that particular combination of hope and exhaustion I recognized from my own early days. "Thank you for that talk," she said. "I'm trying to start a company and everyone in my life thinks I'm wasting my time. Hearing you talk about just building because the problem matters, that helped. Keep building," I told her. "And remember that other people's doubt says more about them than it does about you." She nodded and walked away. And I thought about myself 6 years earlier, angry and determined and so desperate to prove I wasn't the failure everyone assumed. I wished I could go back and tell that version of myself that it would work out. Not in the way she expected, not with the validation she was chasing, but with something more solid. Purpose that existed independent of recognition. Success that didn't require anyone else's permission. But I couldn't go back. All I could do was keep moving forward, building things that mattered, existing fully visible not because someone finally saw me, but because I'd learned to see myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Saw your speech online. You killed it. Proud of you, sis." I smiled and typed back. "Thanks. Means more than you know." And it did. Not because I needed his approval, but because it represented something real, a relationship we were actually building rather than pretending existed. It wasn't perfect. It would probably never be uncomplicated. But it was honest, and after 6 years of silence and assumption and careful distance, honest felt like enough. That evening, I sat in my loft as the sun set over Denver, the mountains going from gold to purple to shadow. My laptop was open to Apex's dashboard, showing metrics and graphs and all the quantifiable measures of success. But what mattered most wasn't visible in any chart. It was the knowledge that I'd built something meaningful. That I'd survived being invisible and emerged not bitter but clear. That I'd stopped fighting battles that didn't matter and started showing up for work that did. I wasn't the person my family had assumed I was. But I also wasn't the person I tried to prove I was. I was something more complicated and more real. Someone who'd built a company and a life on her own terms. Someone who'd learned that being seen was less important than seeing herself clearly. And that finally was enough. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. Almost 18 months after the wedding that had changed everything and nothing. I was in a meeting with our product team, reviewing wireframes for a feature that would allow better cross-team collaboration, when Marissa knocked on the conference room door with an expression I'd learned to read as significant but not urgent. I excused myself and followed her to my office. She closed the door behind us and handed me a printed email. "This came through our general inquiry form about an hour ago. I printed it because I thought you'd want to see it on paper first." The email was from Tyler. Not his work address at Caldwell & Associates, but a personal Gmail account I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Need to talk, it's urgent." The body was longer than Tyler usually wrote, paragraphs instead of his typical 3-sentence summaries. "Jordan, I know we've been building something better over the past year and I don't want to jeopardize that. But I'm in a situation I can't handle alone and I don't know who else to ask. I made some decisions about 6 months ago that seemed reasonable at the time but have spiraled into something I can't control. I'm not asking for money, I know how that would look. After everything, I'm asking for advice from someone who's built something real and knows how to handle pressure without falling apart. Can we meet? Soon? This can't wait much longer. I read it twice, feeling that familiar tension between wanting to help and needing to protect myself. Marissa watched me carefully. What do you want to do? I need more information before I can decide anything. Can you set up a call with him for this afternoon? Somewhere between 3 and 5 if possible. Done. Anything else? Yes. If this turns into something that requires my time and attention, I want you to clear my calendar for the rest of the week starting tomorrow. I'd rather have the space and not need it than be caught without options. She made notes on her phone. I'll have contingency plans ready by noon. After she left, I sat at my desk staring at Tyler's email. The past year had been surprisingly good between us. We'd had coffee every few weeks, dinners with our parents once a month, even a hiking trip in the summer where we talked about childhood memories and discovered we'd experienced the same events completely differently. He'd stopped treating my success as either threat or commodity, and I'd stopped waiting for him to reveal ulterior motives. We weren't close the way siblings in movies are close, but we were real with each other, and that had felt like enough. But this email carried echoes of the dynamic I'd been trying to leave behind. Tyler in crisis, Tyler needing something, Tyler assuming I'd have answers because I'd successfully navigated building a company while everyone doubted me. The old pattern of him taking and me giving, dressed up in the language of mutual respect but potentially just as unbalanced as before. The call happened at 4:15. Tyler's voice came through my speakerphone sounding tired and stressed in a way that reminded me uncomfortably of how I'd sounded during Apex's darkest early days. Thanks for making time, he started. I know you're busy. What's going on, Tyler? Your email made it sound serious. He took a breath. About 6 months ago, I was approached by someone from a startup. They had this technology for optimizing marketing campaigns using predictive analytics, really sophisticated stuff. They wanted to pilot it with Caldwell and Associates, and they offered me equity if I could get buy-in from leadership. It seemed like a win for everyone. We'd get cutting-edge tools, they'd get a prestige client, I'd have a stake in something potentially valuable. I said carefully. What went wrong? The technology doesn't work. Not the way they claimed it would. And instead of admitting that and pivoting, they've been doctoring the performance reports to make it look successful. I didn't know that's what they were doing until about 3 weeks ago when I dug into the actual data because Richard was asking detailed questions. The numbers they've been showing us are completely fabricated. Did you tell Richard? Not yet. That's the problem. If I tell him now, it looks like I was either incompetent for not catching it sooner or complicit in the fraud. Either way, my reputation is destroyed and possibly my career. But if I don't tell him and he finds out another way, it's even worse. I'm trapped between two terrible options and I don't know which one does less damage. I leaned back in my chair, thinking through the implications. Do you have any documentation showing when you discovered the discrepancies? Some. Emails I sent to the startup founders asking for clarification. Their responses are vague, but they show I was questioning things. That's good. That establishes a timeline. What about the equity arrangement? Is there a written agreement? Yes. Standard founders stock, vesting over 4 years. I haven't received any shares yet, because they're tied to performance milestones that now I know were fabricated. So you haven't actually benefited from the fraud. You just facilitated the introduction and were promised future compensation that never materialized. Exactly. But I still brought them into Caldwell. I'm the reason Richard trusted them. And now the company has wasted resources on technology that doesn't work while I stood to gain if it succeeded. I was quiet for a moment, remembering the early days of Apex when I'd made partnership decisions that seemed smart until they weren't, when I'd trusted people who turned out to be unreliable, when I'd had to choose between admitting mistakes and hoping problems would resolve themselves. The temptation to hide errors, to buy time, to protect your reputation at the expense of honesty, that was universal. What separated people wasn't whether they felt that temptation but what they chose to do about it. You need to tell Richard everything, I said. Today if possible, tomorrow at the latest. You need to bring all your documentation, show him exactly when you discovered the problems, and make clear that you're coming forward, because it's the right thing to do even though it puts you at risk. He'll fire me. Or at minimum demote me. Everything I've worked for at Caldwell will be gone. Maybe. Or maybe he'll respect that you caught the problem and brought it to him before it got worse. Richard's built a successful company by making good decisions about people. Give him the information he needs to make a good decision about you. What if he decides I'm too much of a liability? Then you'll deal with that. You'll find another job. You'll rebuild your reputation. But you won't be carrying around the weight of covering something up. And trust me, Tyler, that weight gets heavier every day you hold it. How do you know? 'Cause I've made mistakes too. Different mistakes, but just as scary in the moment. And every time I chose honesty over self-protection, even when it cost me something in the short term, it turned out to be the right call. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because I could live with myself afterward. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, I'll talk to Richard tomorrow morning. First thing. Will you, I know this is asking a lot, but will you be available if I need to call you after? Just to talk through whatever happens?" "Yes. I'll keep my afternoon clear." "Thank you, Jordan. Really. I know our relationship has been complicated, and I know I haven't always been the brother you deserved. But I'm grateful you're still willing to help me. We're figuring it out," I said. "Both of us. That's all we can do." After the call ended, I sat in my office watching the sun move lower toward the mountains. I thought about calling my mother, giving her a heads up that Tyler was dealing with something difficult. But that felt like overstepping, inserting myself into family dynamics in ways that might not be helpful. Tyler was an adult. This was his situation to navigate. I could offer advice and support, but I couldn't protect him from consequences any more than anyone had protected me. Instead, I called Alex Rivera. We'd become genuine friends over the past year, meeting for coffee between her monthly gatherings, talking through the specific challenges of running companies while managing complicated family relationships. She answered on the second ring. "I need a gut check," I said. "Tyler just asked me for advice about a work situation that could damage his career." I gave him what I think is the right answer, but I'm second-guessing whether I'm being helpful or just projecting my own experiences onto his situation. "Tell me about it," she said. I walked her through the conversation, Tyler's dilemma, my advice to come clean immediately. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "That was good advice," she said finally. "Hard advice, but good. The question is whether you gave it because it's what Tyler needs or because it's what you needed to hear when you were building Apex." "I don't know. Maybe both?" "That's fair. Here's what I think matters. You told him the truth as you understand it. You didn't make promises about outcomes you can't control. And you offered support without taking responsibility for his choices. That's what good boundaries look like. Whatever happens next is his to navigate. What if he loses his job? Because of my advice? Then he loses his job and learns something about the cost of integrity. You can't protect people from consequences, Jordan. You can only help them face consequences with dignity. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tyler, about the conversation he'd have with Richard in the morning, about all the ways it could go wrong. I thought about my own early mistakes with Apex, the vendor who'd overcharged us by $40,000 because I hadn't read a contract carefully enough, the hiring decision that had brought someone toxic into our culture for 6 months before I finally admitted my error and let them go, the product feature I'd promised a major client before confirming our team could actually build it. Each of those mistakes had felt catastrophic in the moment. Each time, I'd been terrified that admitting the error would destroy everything I'd built. And each time, facing the truth directly had been painful but survivable. The vendor situation had been resolved through negotiation. The bad hire had taught me what to look for in future candidates. The overcommit feature had led to a deeper partnership with the client when I'd been honest about our limitations. But I'd navigated all of that alone. No family to call, no sibling to ask for advice, no parent to help me think through options. The loneliness of that time had been acute, a specific kind of isolation that came from carrying problems no one else knew about. Tyler had reached out. He'd asked for help. That was something I'd never felt comfortable doing with him or our parents, not during the years when I was building Apex and they thought I was barely surviving. Maybe that was progress. Maybe the relationship we were building allowed for mutual vulnerability in ways the old dynamic never had. Or maybe I was reading too much into a single crisis call, projecting hope onto a situation that was simply practical problem solving between adults who happened to share DNA. Wednesday morning arrived without any message from Tyler. I went to the office early and tried to focus on regular work, the quarterly budget review that needed attention, the client proposal that was due by Friday, the hiring pipeline that required decisions about which candidates to move forward. But my attention kept fracturing, checking my phone for messages, wondering whether Tyler had talked to Richard yet, whether the conversation had gone well or badly or somewhere in the complicated middle. At 11:30 my phone rang. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. I stepped into an empty conference room and answered. "How did it go?" I asked without preamble. His voice was shaky but not devastated. I told him everything. Showed him all my documentation. Admitted I should have dug deeper earlier instead of trusting the startup's reports at face value. He listened without interrupting, asked some clarifying questions, then said he needed time to think about next steps. "That sounds reasonable." "He didn't fire me," Tyler continued. "But he did not fire me either. He said my job isn't in immediate jeopardy, but my trajectory at the company is on hold pending an internal review. No promotion considerations for at least a year. Formal documentation in my file. And I have to be part of the team that unwinds the relationship with the startup and manages the fallout with our board." "That's hard," I said. "But it's also survivable. I keep thinking I destroyed everything. 5 years at Caldwell, all that work, all that progress, and now I'm the guy who brought in a fraudulent vendor and didn't catch it fast enough. Or you're the guy who caught a problem and brought it forward even though it was safer to stay quiet. That matters, Tyler. Character isn't about never making mistakes. It's about what you do when mistakes happen. That sounds like something you learned the hard way." "Everything I've learned came the hard way. I don't know any other method." He gave a short laugh, more exhale than humor. "Thank you for yesterday. For telling me what I needed to hear instead of what I wanted to hear. I don't know if I would have gone to Richard this quickly without that conversation. You would have gotten there eventually. I just helped you get there before the situation got worse." We talked for a few more minutes about logistics, about how he'd tell our parents, about whether he needed to worry about legal liability. I gave him what reassurance I could based on my limited understanding of his situation, but mostly I just listened while he processed what had happened and what came next. After we hung up, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. Not because Tyler's situation was resolved, it wasn't, but because I'd been able to help him in a way that felt authentic rather than obligatory. The relationship we'd been building over the past year, tentative and careful and real, had been tested by actual need and had held. That felt significant in ways I was still learning to articulate. That evening my mother called. "Tyler told us what happened with work," she said without preamble. "He said you helped him decide to come forward. I wanted to thank you for that. And to apologize that you had to learn how to handle things like that alone while we were busy assuming you couldn't handle anything. Mom, you don't need to apologize every time something reminds you of the past. Maybe not. But I'm going to anyway until it stops feeling necessary." She paused. "Your father and I were talking tonight about how different you and Tyler are. He needs validation and structure and clear markers of success. You just needed problems worth solving. We spent so many years trying to make you more like him that we completely missed who you actually were. I'm still figuring that out myself. Well, for what it's worth, I like who you're becoming. Or maybe who you've always been and I'm just now able to see. Either way, I'm grateful you're patient with us while we catch up." After she hung up, I poured a glass of wine and stood at my apartment window looking out at Denver's lights. The city stretched out below, all those separate lives happening simultaneously. All those private struggles and quiet victories that would never make headlines or wedding toasts. Somewhere out there, someone was building something while being underestimated. Someone was making difficult choices about integrity versus safety. Someone was learning that being seen didn't solve problems, it just changed which problems you had to solve. The next few months settled into a rhythm that felt more sustainable than anything I'd experienced since starting Apex. Work was challenging but not all-consuming. Family relationships required effort but not constant vigilance. I attended Alex's gatherings and spoke honestly about the ongoing process of figuring out who I was beyond the person who'd built a company to prove doubters wrong. I hired a coach, not a business coach but someone who helped me think about purpose and meaning, and what I actually wanted my life to look like. Tyler and I met for coffee regularly. He was managing the fallout from the startup situation with more grace than I'd expected, taking responsibility without drowning in shame, using the experience to become more careful rather than more cynical. His trajectory at Caldwell had been derailed, but he was still employed and still respected, just operating under a longer timeline to rebuild trust. In December, almost 2 years after the wedding, Richard Caldwell invited me to lunch. Not a business lunch, he clarified when he called. Just two people who've been connected in unexpected ways having a conversation. I accepted, curious what he wanted to discuss. We met at a quiet restaurant in Cherry Creek, the kind of place where power lunches happen, but without the performative energy of downtown spots. Richard was already seated when I arrived, reading something on his phone, a glass of water on the table in front of him. "Jordan, thank you for making time." He stood and shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who'd been doing this for decades. "I appreciate you indulging an old man's nosiness." "You're not that old," I said. "And nosiness implies you're asking about things that aren't your business. I have a feeling whatever you want to talk about is more substantial than gossip." He smiled. Direct. I like that. "Okay, here's what I've been thinking about. Your company and my company have had a good relationship for several years now. Your software legitimately makes us better at what we do. But more than that, I've watched how you've handled the complicated situation with Tyler. The professionalism, the boundaries, the willingness to help without compromising your business. That's rare. I appreciate that. What I'm wondering is whether there's an opportunity for a deeper partnership. Not an acquisition, I know you're not interested in selling, but a strategic alliance of some kind. Caldwell and Associates has a lot of clients who could benefit from Apex's capabilities. You have a product that solves real problems. What if we formalized a relationship where we become a preferred partner, not exclusively but intentionally? I considered this carefully. What would that look like practically? He pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. I've been sketching some ideas. Nothing formal, just thinking out loud. We could create a referral program where we introduce Apex to our clients who need what you offer. We could integrate our services so clients using both our companies get a more seamless experience. We could share market intelligence and client feedback to help both companies get better. The specifics would need to be worked out, but the concept is collaboration rather than transaction. And Tyler? How would that work given his position at your company? Honestly, I think having him connected to this makes it stronger, not weaker. He's learned a hard lesson about due diligence and integrity. Those lessons make people better, not worse. And having a personal stake in seeing both companies succeed, that's motivating in productive ways. We talked through possibilities for another hour. Not making decisions but exploring what a real partnership might look like, what problems it would solve, what complications it might create. By the time we left, we'd agreed to have our teams explore options and come back together in January with something more concrete. Walking to my car afterward, I thought about how different this conversation was from where I'd started. 2 years ago, I'd been invisible to my family, unknown to people like Richard, building a company more to prove a point than to create something sustainable. Now I was having strategic conversations with industry leaders, managing complex family dynamics with actual boundaries, running a company because the work mattered rather than because I needed validation. The transformation hadn't been dramatic. No single moment where everything shifted. Just accumulated choices to show up honestly, to build for the right reasons, to stop fighting battles that didn't matter. Small decisions that added up to a life that finally felt like mine. Christmas that year was different too. My parents hosted at their house in Highlands Ranch, but the dynamic was looser, more relaxed. Tyler and Vanessa brought their dog, an energetic golden retriever that kept trying to steal food from the table. My father told stories about his own career mistakes, moments when he'd made bad calls and had to clean up the mess. My mother asked real questions about Apex's plans for the coming year, and actually listened to the answers. At one point, I found myself in the kitchen with Tyler, both of us tasked with getting dessert ready. We worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about that wedding," he said. "About Richard's speech and how everything changed after that. Or didn't change, depending on how you look at it." "What do you mean?" "Like, the speech revealed information everyone should have already known if they'd bothered to ask. It didn't actually change who you were or what you'd built. It just changed whether people were willing to see it. And I keep wondering how many other things I'm missing about people because I'm not asking the right questions. That's a good thing to wonder about." He arranged cookies on a platter with more care than the task required. I'm trying to be better at seeing people, at asking questions, and not assuming I know someone's story just because I think I do. It's harder than it sounds. Everything worth doing is harder than it sounds. He smiled. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired enough to be honest. We carried dessert into the dining room where everyone was finishing their coffee and debating which movie to watch. The conversation flowed easily, with none of the tension that had characterized family gatherings for so many years. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of misunderstanding, still gaps where communication broke down. But it was real, and after years of performing the idea of family without actually being one, real felt revolutionary. The new year brought changes I hadn't anticipated. The partnership with Caldwell and Associates moved forward, creating a framework for collaboration that benefited both companies without compromising either's independence. Apex's growth accelerated, not because of the Caldwell partnership specifically, but because the strategic thinking behind it clarified our direction in ways that attracted other opportunities. In February, I hired a COO, someone with more operational experience than I had, someone who could handle the day-to-day management while I focused on strategy and product direction. It meant giving up some control, trusting someone else with decisions that had always been mine alone. But it also meant I could breathe, could think beyond the next crisis, could imagine a version of Apex that wasn't entirely dependent on my constant attention. Helen was thrilled when I told her. This is what mature leadership looks like, she said. Knowing what you're uniquely good at and building a team around your gaps. Too many founders hold on to control long after it stops serving the company. I'm still figuring out how to do it without feeling like I'm abandoning responsibility. That's because you built this company when you had something to prove. You tied your worth to your control. Now you get to separate those things. Your worth isn't about how many decisions you make. It's about making the right decisions, including the decision to let other people lead. By spring, I developed a routine that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. I worked reasonable hours most days. I took weekends off without guilt. I had dinner with friends, attended Alex's gatherings, went hiking in the mountains without checking email every 20 minutes. The company thrived without my constant intervention, which was simultaneously liberating and humbling. Tyler and I had settled into a genuine sibling relationship, the kind built on mutual respect rather than family obligation. We texted stupid jokes and restaurant recommendations. We argued about movies and whether our parents' political opinions were getting more conservative or we were just noticing it more. We showed up for each other not because we had to but because we wanted to. One evening in May, Tyler called with unexpected news. Vanessa and I are pregnant, he said, his voice bright with excitement. We just found out this morning. You're going to be an aunt. That's wonderful, I said, meaning it. Congratulations. I wanted you to be one of the first to know. Not because of family obligation or whatever, but because you matter to me. Your opinion matters. And I want this kid to know you as they're growing up. The real you. Not the aunt who shows up for holidays and smiles politely. I'd like that too. After we hung up, I sat with the news, feeling its weight and possibility. An aunt. A role I'd never considered but that suddenly felt important. I thought about what I could offer this future human, what lessons I'd learned that might matter. Not about building companies or managing family dynamics, but about showing up honestly even when it's hard. About choosing purpose over validation. About being visible to yourself even when others can't see you. The summer brought an unexpected opportunity. A journalist from a business publication reached out asking to profile Apex as part of a series on founder-run companies that prioritize sustainable growth over rapid exits. I almost declined, still cautious about public attention, but my new COO convinced me it was good positioning for the company. The interview happened over 2 sessions, one focused on Apex's business model and growth trajectory, the other on my personal story and leadership philosophy. The journalist was sharp and perceptive, asking questions that got beneath surface-level answers. One of her questions stuck with me. You built this company while being essentially invisible to your family. Now you're visible but you seem ambivalent about that visibility. What's the relationship between being seen and being successful? I thought about it for a long moment. I used to think being seen was the goal, I said finally. That if people just recognized what I'd built, everything would make sense. But visibility without understanding is just another form of loneliness. What matters isn't whether people see you. It's whether you see yourself clearly enough to build a life that feels true regardless of external recognition. The article came out in August, a thoughtful piece that focused mostly on the company but included enough personal detail to be compelling without being invasive. My parents read it and called to say how proud they were. Tyler posted it on his LinkedIn with a comment about being grateful for siblings who teach you what real leadership looks like. Richard Caldwell shared it with his network along with a note about the importance of working with founder-led companies that prioritize values over valuation. The attention was manageable this time. Not because there was less of it, but because I'd learned how to hold it lightly. Recognition was nice but not necessary. Validation was welcome but not essential. What mattered was the work itself, the problems we solved, the team we built, the sustainable business we were creating. In September, Alex invited me to speak at one of her gatherings. Not a formal presentation, just sharing my experience with other founders who were navigating success while managing complicated family dynamics. I talked about the wedding, about Richard's speech, about the 2 years since then. I talked about the difference between being invisible and choosing privacy. About building things for the right reasons versus building things to prove a point. About the ongoing work of separating your worth from other people's opinions. Afterward, a younger founder approached me, probably in her late 20s, with that particular expression of someone carrying weight they're not sure how to set down. "Your story really resonated," she said. "I'm building a company and my family thinks I'm wasting my time. They keep asking when I'm going to get a real job. How did you handle that for so long?" Honestly, I didn't handle it well for most of that time. I carried their doubt like it was my responsibility to prove them wrong. It took me years to realize that their inability to see me wasn't actually about me. It was about their limitations, their assumptions, their inability to ask questions. So what changed? I stopped needing them to see me. Not because I stopped caring about them, but because I realized my worth wasn't dependent on their recognition. And once I knew that, really knew it, their opinion became just another data point rather than the defining measure of my value. She nodded slowly. That sounds simple, but I'm guessing it wasn't. Nothing worthwhile is simple. But it's possible. Just keep building what matters to you and trust that clarity comes from doing the work, not from waiting for permission. October arrived with the kind of perfect fall weather that makes Denver magical, crisp mornings and warm afternoons and mountains brilliant with changing aspen leaves. 2 years after the wedding that had changed everything and nothing, I found myself back at the Pinnacle Club for a corporate event, a fundraiser for a nonprofit that Apex supported. The venue looked the same, floor-to-ceiling windows and mountain views, and that particular kind of understated elegance that came from not trying too hard. But I felt completely different standing there. Not the invisible woman at table 18, not even the suddenly visible CEO whose identity had been revealed against her will. Just someone who'd built something meaningful and learned to hold it with open hands. Richard Caldwell found me near the windows. He was talking to a group of other business leaders, and when he saw me he waved me over. "Jordan, perfect timing. I was just telling these folks about Apex and the partnership we've developed. Have you met everyone?" He made introductions, and I talked about the company with the ease of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Just shared what we did, who we served, what problems we solved. The conversation flowed naturally, professional but genuine, connection without performance. Later in the evening I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. Tyler had texted earlier asking if I wanted to have breakfast tomorrow, his treat, to celebrate what he called our 2-year anniversary of becoming actual siblings instead of just people who shared parents. I smiled and texted back yes. My mother had sent a photo from that afternoon, a ultrasound image with a message, "Your niece is looking healthy. We get to meet her in January." I saved the photo and made a mental note to start thinking about what kind of aunt I wanted to be. Alex had messaged about next month's gathering, asking if I'd be willing to facilitate a conversation about sustainable growth versus pressure to scale rapidly. I replied that I'd be honored. Standing there in that ballroom where 2 years earlier everything had shifted, I realized something fundamental. The wedding hadn't actually changed anything. Richard's speech hadn't made me successful or worthy or real. Those things had always been true. What changed was my willingness to exist fully regardless of whether anyone acknowledged it. To build for the right reasons. To measure success by internal clarity rather than external validation. I'd spent years being invisible, then being suddenly visible, and now I was learning something more useful than either state. How to be present. How to show up honestly. How to build a life that felt true whether anyone was watching or not. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number that turned out to be the young founder from Alex's gathering. Just wanted to say thank you again for last week. Your story gave me permission to keep building even though my family doesn't get it. That matters more than you probably realize. I typed back quickly. Keep going. The work is worth it even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. You're building something that matters and that's enough. And I realized I finally believed that. Not just for her but for myself. I'd built something that mattered. Not to prove anything, not to earn recognition, not to make anyone finally see me. Just because the problem was worth solving and I was capable of solving it. Everything else, the success and the visibility and the complicated family reconciliation, those were just byproducts of doing work that meant something. I left the fundraiser early, driving home through Denver streets with the windows down, breathing in the cool October air. My loft was quiet when I arrived, just the ambient noise of the neighborhood and the distant sound of music from somewhere down the block. I made tea and sat at my dining table, my laptop closed for once, just existing in the moment without needing to produce or achieve or prove anything. 2 years ago, I'd been carrying so much weight. The burden of invisibility, the exhaustion of building alone, the constant calculus of whether to keep hiding or risk being seen. Now the weight was different. Lighter. More evenly distributed. I had a team that shared the work. Family that finally showed up. A community of other founders who understood the specific loneliness of succeeding despite doubt. Purpose that existed independent of anyone's recognition. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days and difficult decisions and moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But it was mine. A life built intentionally rather than reactively. A company that solved problems that mattered. Relationships based on honesty rather than obligation. And most importantly, a clear understanding that being seen was less important than seeing myself. The Mitchell family's story hadn't ended at that wedding reception. It had just begun, with all of us learning new ways to exist together. Tyler and I building something real. My parents showing up with actual curiosity. A niece coming soon who'd know her aunt as someone who built things and asked questions and existed fully whether anyone was watching or not. I finished my tea and stood at the window one more time, looking out at Denver's lights spreading toward the mountains. Somewhere in that city, in one of those buildings, someone was probably sitting alone right now, building something while being underestimated, carrying weight no one else could see, wondering if the work was worth it. I hoped they'd keep going. I hoped they'd learn what I'd learned, that visibility doesn't create value. It just reveals what was always there. That being seen by others matters less than seeing yourself clearly. That the most powerful thing you can build isn't a company or a reputation, or even a reconciled relationship. It's a life that feels true when you're alone in a quiet room at the end of a long day, knowing you showed up honestly and did work that mattered. That was enough. It had always been enough. I just finally knew it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.